Good morning, and thank you, by the way, for inviting me. Every time I come to India, I get some fun new adventures, and this is another one of them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's good to think in the long term, in terms of decades. And so I'm going to start with some history. So if you think about it, a couple hundred years ago, before the invention of the railroad, most people, they were born, they grew up, they got married, had children, they lived and died without ever traveling very far from where they were born, right? People who traveled more than 20, 30, 50 miles from where they were born were rare, unless there was some massive dislocation due to famine or war. In addition, cities were limited in how big they could grow, because how far could farmers bring food into the city? So the amount of people you could have in a city, the size of a city, was limited by how far people could take their produce on a regular basis to feed that city. When the railroad came along, suddenly you started having people who, hey, I'm a farmer and I'm going to send my food 50 miles, 100 miles off to some city. Cities were able to grow. People were more mobile. It changed society. Now, it didn't change society overnight. It changed society over 50 years. And the people who started to see that trend, the people who were able to take advantage of it, they became huge railway moguls, but they also took advantage of things like the growth in cities, the changes in economies. And you look at that curve, and this is an example of railway miles of railway track, and it's going up and up and up. Everybody in the world thought it was just going to keep going on, that railways were it. And then all of a sudden, you had a new vehicle, an automobile. And automobiles started out as toys. If you were a rich person, you might have a car as a toy. You had your horse for your personal transport. Horses have been great for thousands of years. They were the key mode of transport. And, if I came along to you and I said, this car is going to be better transport than that horse, you'd say to me, what do you mean? I let my horse graze in the field? I don't need a road? I don't need to buy gasoline? I don't have to maintain it? Of course horses are going to be the best transport. Cars, they're just toys for rich people. Well, all of a sudden, you paired the automobile with the ability to manufacture it at scale, and automobiles started taking off. So if you were in the United States in 1900, an automobile was a toy for somebody who was rich, and your personal transport was horses, and your long-distance transport was railways. 15 years later, after Henry Ford started manufacturing cars that people could afford, all of a sudden, horses were toys for rich people, and cars were the dominant mode of transport. And you look at what happened to railways, and nobody would have guessed it except for a very few people who became very rich, very successful, and changed society with the automobile. Simple story, and that happens all the time in these things. Everybody knows the railway is going to keep going forever. A few people see the change, they take advantage of it, and they emerge big winners. So let's look at another example more recently. So movies. So again, in the United States, there was a store called Blockbuster. You'd go in, you'd rent your DVDs. I remember I used to go in, I did not take my kids because my kids came along later, but I'd go in with my wife, we'd browse for movies, we'd go rent a DVD, take it home and watch it. And again, Blockbuster, going to the moon. It's going to be dominant company, make tons and tons of money. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes along and says, you know what? Instead of going to the store, I can just mail the DVDs to you. And then you go a little further, and I can stream them. And what happens? Blockbuster collapses, and streaming video takes off. I switched to streaming a few years ago. I was getting satellite. I switched to streaming. Much happier. I have a lot more services, I'm afraid. It's one of those things, you collect them, but that's how it goes. So, when you can look ahead, when you can see these trends, when you can take advantage of new demographics and new things, you can emerge a big winner. So now I'm going to talk to you about something a little more personal. My journey in tech and pure storage. So let's talk about hard drives, all right? Hard drives are the dominant storage technology for most of my life. And you look at what happened with hard drives, they just kept getting better and better and better at a tremendous rate. So roughly speaking, I just sort of picked 1970 as the start of this. The hard drive was actually invented in 1955, right? So you think about it, that technology is 70 years old. We live in a high-tech world. How many pieces of technology are 70 years old and haven't fundamentally changed? The hard drive has been amazing. So, the y-axis on this graph is not really any one particular thing. It's the combination of how big the hard drive was in terms of how much it could store, how much it cost, how fast it was, how much power it took, how reliable it was, all the things that people think of as good. And the hard drive was on an exponential improvement curve, from 1970 through about 2001 that was just amazing. Every technology that was going to replace it was just ground into dust by that improvement. I remember in the early 80s, I was working at Bell Labs when I was going to college, and we had a professor who came and talked to us about this new technology that was going to wipe out hard drives. It was better, it was faster, it was cheaper, it was more reliable, it was more scalable. That was optical storage, aka CD-ROMs. Clearly, disk just kept getting better, ignoring what everybody thought. CDs never caught up to it, so they eventually replaced floppy drives, for those of you that might remember what floppy disks were. But they never came close to replacing hard drives. In 1981, around when I actually started working, IBM came out with the first 1 gigabyte hard drive, right? And you think about that, a whole gigabyte in one hard drive. It cost $40,000. So now, if you take out your cell phone and you have a terabyte on that cell phone, you basically have $40 million worth of 1981 storage, right? That's what I have in my cell phone. Someday, by the way, my cell phone will simulate a mainframe and replace a $5 million mainframe computer too. The point is, disk just kept getting better and better and better. And everybody just thought it would continue. About 2001, disks stopped getting faster. So a disk is a mechanical piece of technology. You rotate the disk, and when you go to read data, the read heads move from track to track. That's called seeking. That takes a lot of time. Then when they get to the right track, to the right radial distance on the disk, you have to wait for the disk head to rotate the data underneath the head. So disks had been spinning faster and faster, but in 2001, after they came out with 15,000 RPM drives, they kind of stalled. And part of the reason they stalled is the disk head actually flies over the surface. That's aerodynamics. And unlike all the electronic marvels we have with computers, aerodynamics doesn't change a whole lot. And when the disk spins faster, the material sort of stretches a little bit, so it becomes harder for the disk head to find the exact right place. It becomes harder to manufacture the disk to the tolerance needed. But it also takes a lot more energy, and the aerodynamics begins to change between the outer tracks that are effectively, it's flying faster, and the inner tracks where you're closer to the center and it's flying more slowly. So they stopped getting faster. When the disks stopped getting faster, I was actually working at Veritas at the time, and I sort of saw that, okay, this is an increasing problem. Every time the disks now get bigger, you have to access your data less often. Because when I put more data onto the same hard drive and it's no longer faster, I can't access that more data as often, in terms of my accesses per terabyte. And so in fact, I started at the time trying to do a couple of new features in the Veritas file system and the Veritas volume manager I was working on to take advantage of that fact, to take advantage that I could buy large capacity slower disks or small capacity faster disks. You saw people start to do things like short stroking disks. What short stroking, that was a technique where you buy a hard drive and you'd only use a small part of it so the disk heads didn't have to seek over as much data. Again, it makes the disk ridiculously more expensive, and it's just a Band-Aid that the next time the disk gets larger and the next time the problem just gets worse and worse. So effectively, around 2001, my index of what I would call total goodness for a hard drive, the curve changed. It stopped getting better at the same rate. And like I said, I was trying to do some features in the Veritas products to take advantage of that. That's the point in time where I realized that disks were finally ready to be replaced, that was going to happen. Then you come along to around 2010, and I started Pure in 2009. That's about the same time. The disks stopped getting bigger at the same rate. So the biggest thing that had been driving disks was they kept getting larger and larger and larger and cheaper and cheaper. And that path changed again around 2010. It slowed down. So now, as I started Pure, I was amazingly convinced it was time for the media to change. Well, what's going to happen? So Flash comes along. Flash was more expensive than hard drives, a lot more expensive. But Flash found a niche in consumer devices. So anybody who remembers having an iPod, the first iPods had hard drives, little tiny hard drives in them. And you'd take your iPod along and you'd go jogging, and occasionally your music would skip. You'd drop your iPod and the disk heads would crash, and it would break. Well, when they switched to Flash, the Flash was more expensive, but it gave you longer battery life, and it meant that your device was much more immune to shaking or dropping. Big advantages for a consumer device. It allowed Flash to start scaling, and then smartphones and things like that came along. I have no idea how much Flash my car has, but I guarantee it's a lot more than I would think if I knew. And so Flash ended up on the same kind of curve as disk. And it was obvious to me at the time that I look at these two lines and what's going to happen? The Flash is going to keep getting better and better and better, and it's going to replace all the hard drives out there, right? And it's just a question of when. When we started Pure, what people referred to as enterprise Flash cost 30 times as much as a hard drive, a high-performance hard drive. Consumer Flash cost about 6 times as much as a high-performance hard drive. So we used data reduction techniques to get the cost to approximately equivalent, and we were able to start replacing the highest performance disk workloads, where the greater performance of Flash was a huge advantage, the cost was about the same, and so it made sense. And ever since then, as Flash has continued to come down in cost, increase its scale, increase its resiliency, get better and better and better versus hard drives, the use cases have been eaten away. Today, the last bastion of hard drives is in the largest hyperscalers and the largest data repositories. When somebody's buying an exabyte of storage or 5 exabytes of storage, the fact that a disk is cheaper to buy makes a big difference. The problem is the disk is cheaper to buy, but it isn't cheaper to run. It's got a lot more power that it consumes. It is less reliable. It fails more often. It takes up more space. It generates more e-waste. And so, again, year by year, the flash is getting better. So you ask yourself, what's going to happen? Will these lines go like that? I'm utterly convinced they will. And I've been utterly convinced they would since sometime in the early 2000s. And the whole premise of Pure is based on this curve following the long-term trends, and it's a very simple thing. Flash is going to get to where it is so much better than disk from every standpoint that the disks are going to go away. And a great story that's lasted 70 years plus in the tech industry is going to go into the history just like many other devices. And one thing, I actually brought a sample, some evidence of that. Today, the largest hard disk you can buy is basically a 30 terabyte module. This is one of our Pure Flash modules. This has 300 terabytes in it. So you think of one of these that weighs about as much as your cell phone, a little bit larger than your cell phone, replacing a hard drive that weighs as much as your laptop, and it doesn't replace one of them, it replaces 10 of them. Now, the reason, again, if I go back to this curve, this is a model that we're testing now, we'll be selling later this year. A year ago, 150 terabytes was the largest one. Next year, at the end of the year, we'll have 600 terabytes in one of these, and in a couple of years, we'll be over a petabyte in one of these. And you compare that to these hard drives, and you compare how much power, space, e-waste they take, it just seems completely obvious to me. And what I find funny is how unobvious it seems to the disk drive companies that still think hard drives are going to be the dominant technology for the next 20 or 30 years. Now, the hardest thing to do is to convince everybody who understands the conventional wisdom that hard drives are cheaper that it's time to change. But it does happen person by person, company by company, and so over time, that's what's going to happen. I think when you look at this, when you look at the tech industry, when you look at AI, as so many of the speakers are talking about, with AI, we're in the early stages. Okay, everybody's rushing to find the killer use case. Everybody's rushing to experiment with it. It will happen. I guarantee that 20 years from now, 25 years from now, I will feel like a complete alien, and my children or my grandchildren will be so at home with AI, and I'll think, of course, it's the end of civilization as we know it. Because that's what happens. You get older and you believe that the new stuff is so non-understandable. But, that's out there. For the people who can properly think about what it will do long term, that's out there. I look around. Every time I come to this country, I talk to some of the people. Ajaya, who's our head of our India organization, is always introducing me to interesting people with some amazing ideas. Right? You think about the demographic shifts that have been happening over the years. There's so much opportunity here for people who can look ahead through those demographics and say, as hundreds of millions of people change their lives, change the way that they function, what they can do, and there's opportunity there. And so with that, I think that is the key reason why you want to think over the long term. When you follow the curves like this, the wind is at your back, and that gives you a gigantic advantage. And the one thing that I really would also say, you really have to have conviction on this. Don't go with the common sense. Don't go with what everybody thinks. Figure out where that long-term trend is your friend. Have a ton of conviction, even when everybody says that you're, nuts, that it's never going to happen, it's impossible, it can't be done. When you know the long-term trend is your friend, be convicted on it, and don't go with the consensus. So, thank you very much, and have a great day.